Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial on the SQL injection section of the Damn Vulnerable Web application. If you want to skip to a particular difficulty level, you can take a look at the description for the timestamps to each of those, and you can also find answers to all of these challenges at my GitHub, which is also in the description. Our aim for this section is to list all the users' names from the users table in the database. Note that there will be several correct answers and we won't necessarily be going through all of them, so feel free to experiment and find your own. We'll start with the low difficulty. We're asked to enter a user ID, but looking at the source shows that there is nothing really stopping us from entering something else. We can also see that whatever input we give is concatenated with the rest of the SQL query, and will be evaluated as part of the query. What we want is to submit a value such that we are returned every row from users, instead of just the ones where ID matches our input. We can achieve this by entering the payload quote or 1 equals 1 semicolon hash. Let's break down this attack. The expression 1 equals 1 will always evaluate to true, and a true value ORed with any other value will also always return true. So, OR 1 equals 1 will return true. The single quote is needed to match the opening single quote already in the SQL query, so that we don't get a syntax error. And the semicolon is there to end the query, also to stop us getting a syntax error. The hash is the comment character, which comments out everything that comes after the point where our input ends. Depending on the SQL backend this server is using, the comment character could be a double hyphen. Putting all of this together gives us our final payload, which, when inserted into the query, makes the query read select first name last name from users, where user ID is equal to quote quote or 1 equals 1 semicolon hash quote semicolon. Since comments are ignored, and we know that or 1 equals 1 evaluates to true, this becomes equivalent to select first name last name from users where true, which itself is equivalent to select first name last name from users, which just lists the entirety of the first and last name columns, as you can see when we submit this payload. The line ID quote or 1 equals 1 semicolon hash appears because the page is using the ID variable that we supplied it, and not because that line necessarily appears anywhere on the database. If you've learned about cross-site scripting, you'll know that this also creates a cross-site scripting vulnerability in the page. On to the medium difficulty. This challenge uses a drop-down menu to select values sent in a post request, so we have to make use of Burp Suite to capture the message before it's sent. Using Burp, we can see the post parameters conveniently highlighted at the bottom of the message. We replace the value of the ID parameter with the payload for our attack, like so. I've entered the same payload that we used for the last challenge, but you'll see in a moment that this won't actually work. Forwarding the packet makes the page throw an error saying our syntax is incorrect. If we look at the page source, we see that the query we're trying to exploit looks like this. And if we insert our payload into the ID parameter, we'll end up with a query that reads select first name, last name from users, where user ID is equal to quote or 1 equals 1 semicolon hash semicolon. Since there was no single quote in the original query, we don't need one in our payload to match it. The reason the query has no single quote is that it's expecting an integer rather than a string. An example of a correct payload is to replace the single quote with an integer, like 1 or 1 equals 1 semicolon hash. So the full query will now read select first name last name from users where user ID equals 1 or 1 equals 1 semicolon hash semicolon. Let's send that payload with Burp and see if it works. And we can see it's worked perfectly. We can see everyone's names. The high difficulty is actually almost identical to the low difficulty. Clicking the link opens a dialog box with a form field that we can insert our payload into. Running our attack, just the way we did with the low difficulty, works great. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you very much for watching.